Yeah, but talking about these two players, we did see Daniel, like you mentioned, Lou, yesterday with that Shadow Rider Calyrex, and it was a phenomenal game that he had, and the showcase between the Cinderace as well, and showing the support there. But going up against a little bit of a different team here today with Yoav, you know, with the Groudon, it's going to make an interesting match for both players. Obviously, Daniel is quite a newcomer to the Pokemon competitive scene, and obviously this is an amazing accomplishment in himself, progressing to this stage of the Players Cup 3. So this will be one to kind of put on that mark and him to take forward and start his competitive journey and see what else he can achieve going forward.
Yeah, I love seeing the Pokemon history being made when players are kind of having their breakout tournament. To be able to feature these kinds of things on stream are the memories that are meant to be made by Pokemon. And taking a look at these teams as well, the one Pokemon I really want to kind of talk about is the Minshao on Daniel's team. Not a Pokemon we got to feature yesterday, but it certainly can have a few tricks up its sleeve with those powerful fighting type attacks like close combat. It can apply a lot of pressure to the Incineroar and the Porygon 2 on Yoav's side of the field. Particularly if it has the ability in a focus, then it is not going to be able to be intimidated by that Incineroar, which could cause a couple of problems for Yoav.
Yeah, and it gets a lot of utility moves, you know, like Fake Out for itself to be disruptive. It gets Taunt as well, which is commonly used for, and lots of other moves as well. And obviously the fighting type attacks as well, going to threaten things like the Porygon 2 and the Incineroar, like you've mentioned, and just give, you know, a lot of things on Daniel's team a little bit of room to kind of function, especially the Whimsicott if it's in a position where it needs to be able to get its tailwind up, or, you know, something like the Cinderace where it might need to get a bounce off like we saw Daniel use it yesterday, just to get out of harm's way for a turn or two. So Mindshout can be very, very good in the right conditions, but going to struggle against some things like Charizard where it may not have the attacks to really hit it for super effective damage, and the Airstreams are going to really threaten it back, you know.
Well, that's the thing, Yoav has so much flexibility on his team, whether he wants to maybe go for the Charizard and Groudon kind of strategy, or he could go for the Venusaur and Groudon strategy as well. And if Venusaur is going to be really speedy, it can apply a lot of damage with those G-Max Vine Lashes, and then of course set up that residual damage. And we talk about it time and time again, Lee, that residual damage can be so critical, particularly if you're able to set it up early and start chipping away. Your Pokemon from the back can then come in and pick up such easy KOs.
Yeah, and you know, the one thing when you look at Yoav's team is he's got that Porygon 2, and it doesn't really mind the Shadow Rider Calyrex too much, because it's obviously immune with its normal type into the Ghost type attacks. Still has to be a little bit careful around the Psychic type attacks, the Expand in Force, especially if the Psychic terrain's up. So it can't just kind of just relax the whole time when it's out there, but it does have an easier time setting up maybe the Trick Room. Just got to be careful around something like the Mind Share that could potentially carry the Taunt to prevent that from being set up. But I think if Yoav can actually utilize that Trick Room mode, I think, you know, Daniel's going to really struggle, because he doesn't really have the Pokemon that can operate in Trick Room as well as maybe some of the other teams that we've seen throughout this event so far.
Well, we've done a little bit of analysis there, so let's get this tournament started. Very excited to see the leads here, and for Yoav, I can see a Grimmsnarl and a Porygon 2, and on the opposing side of the field for Daniel, it is that Minshao paired up with Thundurus.
Yeah, coming out in game one here to support Daniel's side of the field, you know, and providing Fake Out support, going to disrupt the Grimmsnarl from being able to potentially get screens up, which is going to prolong the defensive capabilities of Yoav's team. Porygon 2 is a little bit threatened here, because potentially if Thundurus does go for the max here, you know, it's got Max Knuckle, and that'll boost its attack and Mindshao's attack, and Mindshow can then go for a potential close combat into that slot. And, you know, if Yoav takes a lot of damage onto that Porygon 2 early on in this game, it's not going to be good if he wants to go down a Trick Room route later. So maybe wants to think about how he wants to approach this. If he's comfortable with potentially being able to get a Reflect Up now, that'll definitely help out. And Daniel does have to worry a little bit about a potential Ice Beam from that Porygon 2 that could come out onto the Thundurus and do big damage.
Yeah, well, Porygon 2 just going to leave the field. Certainly was a threat for Daniel. Trick Room is not the strategy that Daniel wants with a generally speedy-looking team, but Charizard is going to join into the fray. Daniel going to go straight away for that Dynamax, however, and I believe it's Dynamaxing up that Thundurus, and this is where you get lots of different options. Like you said, Lee, you could go for that Max Knuckle and boost up both the attack stats on these Pokemon. That would also help out the Minshao if wants to go for something like a close combat, but can also go for something like a Max Airstream here and boost up the speed. So it's going to be interesting to see which play Daniel wants to go down for here. Of course, The fake out was the option there, coming out into that Charizard with a critical hit as well. Does a really decent chunk of damage, and it is indeed going to be the Max Knuckle coming out, going to target down into what was the Porygon 2. Charizard's going to be able to take that much better, but critically for Daniel, even if it doesn't do a lot of damage, those Max moves will still give you the boost if they're able to connect. So the Minshao now looking to be much stronger with that attack stat boosted. Grimmsnarl, however, is going to target down into it with that Spirit Break, takes it right down to its Focus Sash. So unless Yoav has a way to be able to try and remove the Minshao from play in that next turn, then it's going to be able to hang around and apply a lot of offensive pressure.
Yeah, definitely. You know, the attack boost there is so big for Daniel, going on the offensive straight away, putting itself, you know, the Thunderous and the Mianshao onto +1 attack. They're going to be able to do a lot of damage this next turn, even if there are resisted moves coming out. You know, the Mianshao is close combat resisted by both the Charizard and the Grimmsnarl, respectively, where they type in. But the Charizard not in a great position here. You may want to see Yoav retreat the Charizard or protect it here, because a Max Lightning coming out here from the Thunderous or an Airstream isn't going to be enough to take it down even behind a Reflect.
Yeah, wise here from Yoav to be able to set up that Reflect, but Charizard not going to be able to take that powerful Max Airstream that was, of course, +1 boosted. Also, now Daniel's able to get another boost on his side of the field in that speed. So Minshao and the Thunderous also going to be at +1 speed here, so the offensive pressure is going to be speedy as well as powerful. Minshao, however, going to go for that close combat. Like you said, not going to be dealing super effective damage by any means into that Grimmsnarl, but thanks to the boost, still does a huge chunk of damage despite the Reflect.
Yeah, that's a massive amount of damage into the Grimmsnarl. You can see the impact that attack boost has already had onto Daniel's side of the field. And like you say, you know, we've said he's approaching this very offensively and taking down the Charizard, getting the Grimmsnarl down to a low point now where it's going to be in knockout range from the Thunderous or another Mianshao close combat this next turn. The problem is as well that it is going to be obviously slower than both the Pokemon on Daniel's side of the field. Groudon going to come back in. It gives Yoav a little bit more stability. Defensive capabilities are a lot better than what has been on the field for him so far, but you think if you are Yoav, you probably want to lose the Grimmsnarl now and get the Porygon 2 in for free. The max turns will then be over, and then that might give you a chance to get your Trick Room set up to support that Groudon a little bit further, considering that the Airstreams have been set up on Daniel's side of the field. But Groudon, it probably needs to max or protect here to get around any big damage coming out from Daniel's side of the field, because it's going to be the one Pokemon that Yoav has to rely on going into these next few turns.
Yes, and of course the Thunderous as well moving before the Minshao could possibly go for another Max Knuckle and boost up the close combat even more of that Minshao, so it could be a formidable threat still. And I think you called this really well here, Lee. The Groudon has to be the offensive powerhouse now. It needs to be able to get that HP up, use its defensive capabilities as well to kind of withstand the onslaught that Daniel is throwing across the field at the moment. So a wise choice to Dynamax it here. Grimmsnarl going to go for the light screen, however, just wanting to set up more protective measures for that side of the field, as the Max Knuckle comes out once again from the Thunderous here. So going to be boosting up that attack stat. Doesn't really do a lot to that Groudon though. You can really see the defensive capabilities of Groudon, particularly behind that Reflect, really helping out here, doing very, very small amounts of damage. But the Minshao does go for that close combat, and again, Groudon able to take that really, really well. So great here from Yoav to be able to boost it up, leaving Groudon free to go for a very powerful Max Rockfall. And this is something that the Thunderous definitely doesn't want to take. It doesn't have any defenses set up at the moment. The Sand is going to come onto the field as well and chip away at these Pokemon, removing the Minshao from the field at the end of this turn.
Yeah, it's a really nice play from Yoav here, you know, not targeting the Mianshao and making sure that you're getting some use out of Grimmsnarl as well if that was targeted by the close combat this turn, and allowing the Sand kind of residual damage here to remove the Mianshao because it's down on its sash. So a really nice play here from Yoav to kind of pull himself back into this game slightly. The Thunderous obviously on +2 attack is still going to be threatening, but we've just seen how much damage it was doing behind the Reflect into the Dynamax Groudon. It's going to be one of the best Pokemon to kind of sit in front of Thunderous. So you'll have in a decent enough position now, kind of playing out these max turns from Daniel's side of the field. But you've got to worry about potentially the Shadow Rider Calyrex that would be in the back. Potentially, if you knock out the Thunderous, if you are Yoav, you're allowing the Calyrex to come in next to that Indeedee, and that can cause you all sorts of issues, even with the light screen up. You know, Grimmsnarl is on such low health, it'll probably go down to an Astro Barrage, especially a Helping Hand boosted one. And Groudon certainly isn't going to be that sort of Pokemon that wants to be able to take that attack either.
I mean, that's the thing, Groudon's very difficult at the moment as well. You can't deal a huge amount of damage to it, so I think if you're Daniel, this is where you need to be able to kind of avoid it on these max turns, whether you're going for something like a fly with your Thunderous or redirecting those single target attacks with the Indeedee, but instead just going on the defensive from both perspectives. You know, the Thunderous jumping up into the air, going to be able to avoid any attacks this turn, and the Protect there on the Indeedee that is unfortunately still going to have to take this max Quake. So even through Protect, it does a little bit of chip damage there, but I think the critical thing is that special defense boost going up on Yoav's side of the field. That is just going to make the Ndidi a little bit harder to deal damage out, but I think critically that Calyrex in the back as well is not going to appreciate these defenses being set up to get in its way.
No, that's the thing, and you know that Yoav's probably got that in the back of his mind. He's got the light screen up to help with the Calyrex in the back, and then these additional special defense boosts are just going to make Groudon even tougher to take down and handle those big, expanding forces, Astro Barrages that would potentially be coming out this next turn, the next few turns, just a lot easier. The Grimmsnarl in a tricky spot now where it probably will go down to a fly, and the Ndidi, in a place where it can go for a redirection with Follow Me, but just seeing the help in hand to support the Thundurus this turn.
Yeah, just being a helpful little Pokemon here, going to boost up that fly into the Groudon. Not going to be dealing too much damage, particularly as Groudon's able to utilize its Citrus Berry and regain a little bit of HP here. Also means that Grimmsnarl's able to survive any damage in this particular turn, is still free to go. Max Quake going to come out once again from that Groudon. It's not enough to pick up a KO against the Ndidi, but I was about to say the residual damage would have an effect, but it is wearing those safety goggles, so we'll also be able to avoid being KO'd on this turn, unless Grimmsnarl has something to say about it. The Spirit Break, however, is going to target down into that opposing Thundurus and pick up the KO instead.
Yeah, and the Thundurus finally going down here for Daniel, but it does pave the way for him to bring in the Calyrex now, and you can see the utility and how good those safety goggles are from just avoiding that additional chip from the Sandstorm that's in play, because it allows it to be in effect now to provide either help and hand support or redirection support to give Calyrex a little bit of additional room that it might need to avoid an attack from the Groudon or the Grimmsnarl. The problem is though for Daniel is the Groudon now has access to a double target attack, so the redirection not really going to be super helpful here, and with those special defense boosts, it's probably sitting in a decent spot to get a big attack off this next turn. Also, the Grimmsnarl, it does have access to Thunder Wave, but with the Psychic Terrain up, not really going to be able to utilize that here, because obviously the Prankster ability, any priority attacks are kind of blocked by that Psychic Terrain. So Grimmsnarl, you're probably looking, you'll have maybe wanting to protect here, but play a bit conservative, get the Porygon 2 onto the field, but maybe allowing the Grimmsnarl to go down, try a Spirit Break into the opposing Calyrex, and if you do see something like an Expanded Force, at least then, the Grimmsnarl is going to be able to stick around for an additional turn here.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If you go for the Expanding Force, you're not going to be able to hit the Grimmsnarl, and if you go for the Astral Barrage and Porygon 2 joins the field, you're not going to be able to hit it either. Indeed, you're going to go for the Helping Hand, though, so whatever choice this Calyrex is locked into, he's going to be able to deal out some big damage. It is indeed the Astral Barrage. Not going to do any damage to Groudon, as it has protected, but going to be able to target down into that Grimmsnarl. And I think this is really wise from Daniel trying to get rid of the Grimmsnarl, because it can go for the Spirit Breaks and start lowering the special defense, and that's certainly the special attack, and that's something that the Calyrex doesn't want. It wants the boost, just like it's got from its Grimnay ability.
Yeah, and now getting that boost, it puts it in a bit more of an awkward position for Yoav to deal with. Even with the special defense boosts on your Groudon, are you going to be able to take a Helping Hand boosted Expanding Force? The Porygon 2's in a great spot where it probably will be able to take that and maybe get a Trick Room up, but if you Yoav, do you risk going for a double Protect here to try and get your Trick Room up? Because Porygon 2 is definitely the one Pokemon that Yoav's got access to now that will be able to take at least one attack here, and you would kind of think, maybe protecting Groudon, it's a little risky. The chances of getting consecutive protects off, drop every time you do that. But is it worth the risk?
Yeah, I mean, if you set up your Trick Room, you kind of want your Groudon hanging around, but not going to risk going for the double protect. Expanding Force, Helping Hand boosted, going to come out from that Calyrex, and it is enough to pick up a KO against the Groudon, but look at the damage on that Porygon 2. Nearly picks up the KO, takes it right down into that red zone. Absolutely incredible damage there from that Calyrex.
Yeah, and we just see the Eerie Impulse come out from the Porygon 2, which is a really nice tool to utilize, from Yoav, dropping the special attack by 2 stages. So kind of just nullifying those Chilling Nair boosts now. But the Porygon 2 going to be too heavily damaged now to be able to kind of claw this one back, and you can see the impact that the Calyrex has had on the field since it's entered from Daniel, and just being able to kind of clean everything up, even with the light screen and the special defense boosts on top of everything else.
Yeah, there's been a really strong offensive pressure from Daniel throughout this whole game, having the Min Xiao out there to be able to target down the Porygon 2 early on, and particularly that combination of Min Xiao and Thundurus picking up that solid KO against the opposing Charizard just meant that it was a little bit difficult for Yoav to kind of get momentum going. And now that we're in this endgame, like you said, as soon as that Calyrex Shadow Rider joined the field, it's just been such a great powerhouse against the opposing Pokemon here, particularly when indeed he's able to stick around the way that it has to be able to provide support, whether it's in helping hand or with redirection.
Yeah, and we didn't actually get to see the turn play out there, but we did see the reveal of Draining Kiss on that Shadow Rider Calyrex, which is a very interesting option, especially if you're going up against a Dark type that's kind of a little bit unsuspected, thinks it's safe in front of those Astral Barrages or Expanding Forces, but if you pull that out, so that makes it a very interesting game going into game 2. You know, we are playing open team sheets, so both players are aware of these things, so you have to be a little bit careful if you are Yoav with your Grimmsnarl. You can't freely just like let it sit in front of the Calyrex knowing that the Draining Kiss is potentially there.
Yeah, that's the thing with open team sheets, you know where all the items are, you know, with the focus ashes, for example, so where you might need to double up, and you can start really getting inside your opponent's head to think about the synergy they're going to want from the two Pokemon that are opposing you on the field. And I think that's one of the really interesting mechanics that's happening here, particularly when you sort of look at that turn 0 and the Porygon 2 was there. It really was a problem for Daniel, because if Trick Room goes up, that puts Daniel on the back foot a little bit, and you saw kind of the double into that slot. That's where Yoav, knowing that the Porygon 2 was going to be a little bit vulnerable and knowing that maybe the Grimmsnarl couldn't support it sufficiently enough, brought in the Charizard. Just unfortunately, I think losing that early KO meant that Yoav couldn't get the momentum needed to kind of carry through the rest of that game.
Yeah, and you think if you are Yoav going into this next game, with how impactful the Groudon was when you did eventually get it onto the field, you think maybe, should I leave that turn 1 here next to my Grimmsnarl, because then you can get the screen support up and Groudon can start functioning a little bit better there, removing the big kind of obstacles that we saw in Thundurus. It was so disruptive, setting things up, just getting enough damage onto things to kind of clear the way for Calyrex to come in. The problem is, if you see the Calyrex lead, that could be a little bit of an issue, and that's something that maybe Daniel looks into going into this game.
Yeah, I mean, the Groudon was great. It just was able to get its Dynamax up and then just stay on the field. Didn't take too much damage from its Dynamax, and it was just really great to kind of have it in play. And it allowed Yoav to kind of really get back into that game a little bit, start doing the boost up in preparation for that Calyrex coming into the field. But unfortunately, Calyrex was just too powerful. So I think it's timely to jump into game 2 and see exactly what adaptations our players are going to make. Remember, we are in the loser side of the bracket, so the winner will continue in the competition, but unfortunately, the loser of the set will be knocked out. It's going to be a Groudon and Grimmsnarl coming out straight away for Yoav, and Daniel is leading out once again with Thundurus and Min Xiao.
Yeah, and it's a much better lead here for Yoav straight away. You know, the Groudon, we saw how well it can take those attacks from Thundurus and Min Xiao, you know, the double up into it there. So if it does decide to max here, it can do some big damage to the opposing Thundurus and kind of waste almost the Dynamax from Daniel's side in a couple of turns and really start getting those defensive boosts kind of stacking up on the Groudon as well. The Grimmsnarl here, there's the opportunity potentially, if we don't see a fake out from that Min Xiao onto the Grimmsnarl, that there is a double up potential into that Min Xiao, but then you've got the problem where you're allowing Daniel to get something next to the Thundurus on the field where it can take advantage of those Airstream boosts.
Yeah, and I mean, the last time we saw Groudon facing down against both of these Pokemon on Daniel's side of the field, it was able to take the attacks really well. So Groudon looking to be in a really strong position here, and Grimmsnarl can, of course, provide really good support. I'm not sure if Daniel was able to lock in just at that very last second. Looks like things have all gone okay as Daniel is going for that Dynamax once again. And I think it's nice to kind of have these early Dynamax turns here where Daniel wants to get set up in the strategy he wants, whether it's boosting up the attack or boosting up the speed. And I think Thundurus is a really great utility Pokemon to be able to give you the flexibility to put your board pieces into play exactly how you want, particularly early on from this game 1. We're going to see a Dynamax on the other side of the field though as well, Lee. I think it might be that Groudon.
Yeah, you would imagine that Yoav's taken full advantage of having that Groudon out on the field in front of two Pokemon. It doesn't really mind being in front of here, and it's going to be able to get big damage onto the Thundurus here, you know. Not worried about the Sash too much on the Min Xiao as well, because we saw in that first game how if you do go for the Max Rockfall, you get the Sandstorm up, and that does affect the potential ability of Min Xiao having that Sash going forward.
Yeah, the Reflect coming up from the Grimmsnarl, just protecting its partner Groudon here from the offensive pressure on Daniel's side of the field. Once again, Thundurus is going to go for that Max Knuckle, dealing a big chunk of damage there. Just going to be boosting up, I think, the attack stat, which is going to be the critical thing needed here to be able to boost up that Min Xiao, going for that close combat into the Groudon. You can see, though, what a tank Groudon is.
Yeah, and I think that we did see Daniel try to lock in the fake out, but maybe just timed out there, and unfortunately wasn't able to get the fake out onto the Grimmsnarl, which makes, you know, getting that additional damage onto the Groudon that much harder, because the Reflect was then able to go up from the Grimmsnarl. Do you see the Groudon already just concentrating down, not really too worried about the Thunderous here, just going for those max Quakes, getting that special defense kind of bolstered up already in this game to kind of prepare for maybe a Shadow Rider Calyrex to come in later in this game, and it does definitely help the Groudon out. Grimmsnarl in a nice position now to get its light screen up, and the Groudon this turn could potentially go for a max Rockfall into the Thunderous, because this is a turn where you are going to be able to get rid of the Mienshao, and you're going to be able to get some big damage onto the Thunderous. So you're getting a lot out of this turn potentially going for that. And Grimmsnarl not really got many other options outside of light screen here, which is also going to be very, very good supportively going forward for Yoav's side of the field.
Yeah, I like the play going for the Max Quake there, because you could be tempted to go for the Max Rockfall and try and pick up the KO with the stand against the Mienshao, but you don't need to, and you don't want to give Daniel the option to bring in a Pokemon from the back. Light Screen being set up though in preparation for those special attackers that may well be lurking in the back for Daniel, as Thunderous does very similarly to game 1 and goes for that Max Airstream. So the attack's been boosted up, but now also the speed will be as well. So if these Pokemon are able to survive out the turn, then they're going to be able to have that speedy offensive pressure as well. But Mienshao going for that close combat into the Grimmsnarl, it is enough to be able to pick up the KO. So now Daniel doesn't have to worry about those Spirit Breaks coming in and potentially, you know, reducing the special attack of something like the Calyrex in the back. Groudon still to move and is indeed going to go for that Max Rockfall. So definitely the time to go for it. You can apply a lot of pressure to that Thunderous and pick up the KO on the Mienshao in the process. And you can see it does a huge chunk of damage.
Yeah, and I think what we've seen a kind of trend from Daniel in his plays, he'll be forced to bring that Indeedee in this next turn, which, you know, it puts him in a little bit more of a defensive position where you have to preserve the Indeedee to support the Calyrex coming onto the field, because you don't want to switch in Calyrex now and then you know bring the Indeedee in, because the Thunderous is a prime target. We know it's not got Protect on Max Guard, or at least it never has done so far in this match. So it's another easy target for the Groudon just to go for that Max Rockfall again, or just go for the Max Quake as well onto that Indeedee. And even if it protects this next turn, it's easy enough for Groudon to go into that just to get that special defense boost. And now the switch into Porygon 2 for Yoav is incredible here, because he's got the option to go for the Trick Room, and there's not really anything on Daniel's side of the field that's going to be able to stop that. The Thunderous has got the attack boost, of course, and it is going to be able to do a significant amount of damage, but not enough with the Reflect support that the Grimmsnarl's already set up for Yoav's side of the field.
That's the thing, the Porygon 2 coming in here is excellent for Yoav. Indeedee and the Thunderous, but thanks to the screen support, aren't going to be able to pick up a KO against it. So if you're Daniel, it now comes down to whether you want to just try and get some damage on that Porygon 2 anyway, or try and pick up a KO against the Groudon so that it can't be utilised in Trick Room. Ultimately, if you're not going to be able to pick up the KO against that Porygon 2, as soon as Trick Room is set, Porygon 2 can just go for a cover anyway and recap all that HP. So you might want to be better suited to try and deal damage to a Pokemon that's not going to be able to regain that HP later on. But Indeedee just going to go for a Protect here, as the Thunderous does indeed go for that Max Knuckle. I'm going to be targeting down into that Porygon 2. You can see how little damage it does. You normally so used to seeing these fighting type moves go into a Porygon 2 and doing so much more, but it looks like the Reflect really paying off here. And of course boosting up the attack a little bit more. Groudon not opting to go for the Rockfall though, so Thunder is able to survive out this turn. Then Indeedee going to be taking that little bit of damage from behind its Protect. But I think the one thing that Yoav's done really nicely here is set up this Groudon so that when the special attackers come in from the back, it's going to have a lot of defenses here in play.
Yeah, definitely. And now the Trick Room is in effect in this Groudon and Porygon 2, and one of their more favorable environments, especially against two Pokemon that, you know, the Indeedee doesn't mind the Trick Room too much, but it's not really the offensive kind of threat that you would want out on the field, like the Calyrex on Daniel's side of the field. And the Thunderous is kind of just a sitting duck now. It'll either go down to an Ice Beam or a Rock Slide. And the problem is here for the Indeedee, it is going to take a lot of damage this turn, whatever happens. If a Rock Slide comes out, it's still going to take a good amount of damage. And you know that will be enough to get the Thunderous, and then you can maybe see a double up from the Porygon 2, either Ice Beam or maybe go for a bit more disruption with an Eerie Impulse, just to really reduce the expanding force damage from that Pokemon on Daniel's side of the field.
That's the thing, Porygon 2 is such a great utility at the moment. It can go for the Ice Beam, apply pressure to the Thunderous, and I can't remember, I think it might have got the special attack boost when it came in, Lee, so maybe the Ice Beams will be able to deal even more damage. And like you said, having the Eerie Impulse is just able to kind of shut down any of those special attackers on the field. But I think it's wise from Porygon 2 here just to go for the nice recover, boost itself back up so it's healthy and ready to go, as Indeedee goes for that expanding force. And although it will be able to connect on both targets, you can see the minimal amount of damage that it is doing. Groudon going to be able to connect its Rock Slide as well, pick up the KO against the Thunderous and do some more damage to that opposing Indeedee. So Daniel no longer has that Thunderous. It's going to be a Pokemon coming in from the back, and I'm sure it's going to be that Calyrex to stand side by side with the Indeedee.
Yeah, but it's not in its most favorable environment now in the Trick Room. It will be moving last out of everything on the field, and it's going to be about whether or not it can, how many Precipice Blades it can really take. Because I think if you are Daniel, you're kind of forced to almost follow me. You could take the approach where you could maybe go Helping Hand just to get that big damage onto the field, but then you're going to be subjected to something like Eerie Impulse that you know is on the Porygon 2 here, and you kind of want to try and avoid that if you are Calyrex. Of course, you've got the option to potentially protect as well to try and stall these Trick Room turns out. You protect this turn with both Calyrex and Indeedee, and then you try and get an attack off the next turn, and then protect the following turn, and that will be the Trick Room ended. So maybe play it out like that, and once the Trick Room has ended, you're going to be in a great spot. But it's just about how well you can kind of manage the damage in between those turns, and keep that Porygon 2 at a level maybe with the attacking turn where it's threatened the following turn where the Trick Room is needed to be set up again by Yoav.
That's the thing as well, if you go for the protects, the Groudon could capitalize on that and maybe try and set up a Swords Dance. But I think Indeedee going for the option here just to redirect away the Eerie Impulse is really great here for Daniel. So Indeedee going to be able to take that, have its special attack lowered by a considerable amount, but I think it's definitely better for the Calyrex to be able to keep those boosts. Groudon just going to go straight away for the Precipice Blades, does manage to connect on both the opposing Pokemon, both able to survive, but you can see they're not going to be able to take another one of those Precipice Blades going forward. The expanding force going down into these Pokemon really not dealing too much damage, and particularly even with the chip here, it's going to be really hard to stall out these Trick Room turns here for Calyrex and Indeedee.
Yeah, just taking too much damage there and just not being able to get the kind of the damage in return back onto the field. You can see how useful the light screen and the double special defense that Groudon's got on the single special defense boost that the Porygon 2's got, how, you know, impactful that attack is now going into that. So you'll have really managed this game a lot better than the first one, kind of learned some lessons, got these Pokemon in a position from the get-go to get them set up and kind of end up with this board position where he was able to get the Trick Room up and really make life difficult for the Calyrex to perform.
I mean, now we see the double protect coming out here from a Daniel. Porygon 2 going to be able to go for the Ice Beam and not be able to find a mark, and it'll be the same with the Groudon and the Rock Slide. So no damage coming out here other than what possibly the sand wants to deal on the battlefield, or not, because it has subsided. So that's a little bit of a sigh of relief there for the Calyrex, but there are still Trick Room turns to go here, Lee.
Yeah, and that's the big problem here. Can you get a double protect off? Because that's what you need if you're the Calyrex, and Indeedee really, because you need the additional support, I think, to kind of stack up that Helping Hand boost to potentially pick up a knockout on both the Groudon and the Porygon 2, really realistically going into that next turn. So if you are Daniel, you're kind of praying that you are going to be able to get a double protect off here, and if you're Yoav, you're hoping that the Calyrex isn't able to get that off.
Indeedee's one has failed, and Calyrex's one has failed as well. Porygon 2 going to be going for its recover as well, knowing that Trick Room is over at the end of this turn. It wants to make sure it's as healthy as can be when it goes back into the speedy mode on the battlefield. Groudon, however, going straight for that Rock Slide, able to connect on both the opposing Pokemon. It's not enough to pick up the KO on the Calyrex, surviving on just 1 HP, but Indeedee has left the field just as the Trick Room and indeed the Psychic Terrain leaves the field as well.
Yeah, and the problem is that the Calyrex can get an attack off, but because of the life orb there, you know, the Calyrex is going to go down. So, you know, you could even just leave the Groudon in Porygon 2 out as kind of fodder here, just to take the hit and allow Calyrex to kind of KO itself with that recoil damage from the life orb item. So, the Groudon not wanting to risk Precipice Blades that turn, I guess, wanting to go with maybe, you know, it's not even that much more accurate, but Rock Slide there just to maybe pick up a flinch if anything did decide to attack that turn, which is, you know, not too far out of, you know, it just makes sense to go for something like that, really, that turn.
Yeah, the rock slide flinch is something we know all too well when it comes to these Pokemon battles, and it certainly was an option to go for here. And I think, like you said as well, that Life Orb, very unfortunate for that Calyrex, and particularly as well with the Psychic Terrain being gone, you can't utilize Expanding Force the same way that you want to. You won't be able to get that double target, and that can be a problem when you're facing down against a Porygon 2 that can't be hit by these Astral Barrages, as you can see there. Porygon 2, however, is going to be able to clean up the game, going for that Ice Beam and pick up the final KO to allow Yoav to take this to a Game 3. Very exciting to kick off the broadcast.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, it's a big turnaround from game 1. You saw Yoav make some big adjustments there. You saw, we talked about it after game 1, you know, how effective the Groudon was from when it came in, but it was maybe a little bit too late because by that point, Daniel had started to kind of build his momentum from his side of the field. The Thundurus had a complete run of its max turns. The Mind Shower had done a lot of damage at that point as well. But this time round, he kind of was very kind of clinical in the way that the Groudon was brought up top. Utilizing those special defense boosts when got the opportunity to kind of be that beneficial in the late game that we saw it was, and utilize the Grimmsnarl while I had time on the field to get that light screen up and the reflect up, which were just phenomenal support. I mean, we saw how much the Max Knuckle did to the Porygon 2 when it came in, and that then allowed Yoav to get the Trick Room up, and that's the route that he needed to go down to close this one up. So yeah, an exciting game, and the ball's now back in Daniel's side of the court, you know, on the battlefield. He's going to have to adjust to kind of face this Groudon turn 1, and are we going to see the Calyrex come out as a lead? It's definitely a possibility. You're going to be able to get a lot more damage onto that Groudon before it starts getting those special defense boosts up, but you've still got to worry about the Grimmsnarl as well. But we do know that the Draining Kiss is there, so that is an option for Daniel as well to take advantage of.
I mean, that was the thing. In Game 2, Daniel was able to deal with the Grimmsnarl much quicker than in Game 1, so I thought that's actually a really good start. You've got rid of this disruptive Pokemon, but the fact that Grimmsnarl's got the Light Clay item as well means those screens are lasting for 8 turns as opposed to 5. It just goes on for a really long time, and it makes it harder for Daniel to stall them out. And I think the critical thing here was, even though you've taken down the Grimmsnarl, it's done what it needed to do. Groudon can keep doing those boosts, and then you can also bring in a supportive Pokemon like the Porygon 2 to kind of manipulate the speed tiers as well. So things worked out really well for Yoav here. It's going to be interesting to see how Daniel can maybe adjust to counter, like you said, the Groudon. And I wonder if maybe, like you said, Calyrex could come out very early on to just deal that big damage before Groudon's able to kind of get in its stride.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, Lou. I think that's a really good analysis there. So let's not hang around anymore. Let's get into Game 3, see which player is going to progress in the Players' Cup 3.
Yeah, it really is all to play for here. Groudon and Grimmsnarl jumping out for Yoav here onto the battlefield. It worked so well in Game 2. And a slight adjustment here for Daniel. The Minshao is still in play, but this time there is a Cinderace by its side.
Yeah, an interesting adjustment here from Daniel. And, you know, the one thing that he's probably looking at here is the Cinderace is going to be able to take advantage of that sun that's being set up by the Groudon, especially with its Gigantamax ability. You know, it's got that big signature attack that it's going to be able to get boosted by the sun and do some big damage to the Groudon. Now, Groudon, you know, is very good defensively, and especially with Reflect supporting it, but this one turn that you've got, if you are Cinderace, you've got the Fake Out support to kind of prevent that Reflect going up, which is really useful. But the one thing, if you go for that, the G-Max Fireball with the Cinderace, is that the Groudon can get a big Max Quake onto you as well, which is going to be super effective damage and really be a hindrance to you going forward.
That's the thing, you can change your, you know, typing with the Libero ability, but sometimes if your opponent's able to predict that as well, or you just keep it being that fire type, then it can be dangerous when you're facing down against a Groudon. But Cinderace showing no fear here at all and going straight away into its Gigantamax form here to apply some pressure to the opposing side of the field. But Yoav going to match that with a Dynamax of their very own, and I believe it's going to be that Groudon, of course, to be able to apply a lot of pressure, like you said, with the Max Quakes, critically boosting up those special defenses as well. And I think also being able to apply pressure with something like the Max Rockfall, if the Cinderace does want to go for something like a Max Airstream and turn us that flying type, it's not going to appreciate taking the Max Rockfall at all. So Grimmsnarl going to go straight away with the Thunder Waves that we haven't seen in action so far this game, connecting right down onto that Cinderace. They're going to be reducing the speed considerably. As Minshao goes straight up for the close combat, there's no Reflect in play, but it still does a decent chunk to Grimmsnarl. Not enough to be able to pick up any sign of a KO, however, leaving Groudon free to go for this Max Quake, and it's going to be able to target right down into that opposing Cinderace and pick up the solid KO. The fact that the speed was reduced meant that, you know, this Cinderace didn't have the opportunity to go for that Max Airstream, make it a flying type and dodge out of the way. It was going to be stuck in its flyer typing and then fall victim to the Max Quake.
Yeah, Daniel not opting to go for the Fake Out there, potentially thinking maybe a switch would come out from Yoav, thinking that Fake Out maybe Airstream going into that slot, but being very bold and sticking in with the Grimmsnarl, going for that Thunder Wave, and it really pays off here. You see that Daniel's got no utility out of his Dynamax Pokemon, and the Groudon sitting in a great position here, already getting that special defensive boost, and the Grimmsnarl going to be able to go for potentially a Light Screen this next turn. You don't need to worry too much about the Mind Shout if you are Yoav, you know, because the Groudon's defenses are so big anyway. You don't really worry about the physical attacks from that end, and you know you're going to be quite able to take care of that later on with potentially other things in the back. But yeah, all things considered, Daniel going really far behind in this first turn and got a lot to do to kind of claw this one back.
That's the thing, it's never easy when you lose your Dynamax, particularly so early on, and the Gigantamax Cinderace didn't even able to get a single max move off in that situation, so there was no benefits here from Daniel. And we saw in games 1 and 2 how critical they were to be able to get the speed and the attack boost up as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know, if you got some utility out of Cinderace here, it would have been brilliant. You could have went for the Grimmsnarl here, potentially removed it from the field, removed that kind of support network that Yoav's been relying on so heavily, and that would have been a great play. But you know, it's never really a great Pokemon to sit in front of Groudon with, because if you do get caught like that, and obviously the Thunder Wave, which he's aware of with the open team sheets, really does punish you, and that Max Quake just far too much from the Groudon. Doesn't need to worry then about going for the Max Quake, because you know you're always going to be faster and the Libera ability not going to be able to kick in.
Yeah, Minshao just going to be able to finish up against that Grimmsnarl with the close combat, but before it was KO'd, Grimmsnarl was able to get that Light Screen up, and again, that's critical. You've dealt with kind of the physical attackers on Daniel's side of the field here. Now you need to get prepared for those special attackers that will be waiting in the back, and Groudon going for this Max Quake down into the Minshao, going to be taking it down to its Focus Sash. Of course, no residual damage here on the field, but I think being able to set up those Max Quakes and preparing itself is the best situation here. Groudon's not going to be scared of the Minshao. We've seen how little damage it can deal, and indeed, it's trying its best in the psychic terrain, but it's just not going to be enough when you're dealing with such a titan such as Groudon.
No, and the thing here for Yoav is this Groudon's still sitting very healthy at this point, you know. Not really worried too much about anything that's coming out from Daniel's side of the field at the minute. The Mind Shout it can do a bit of damage, obviously, to the Porygon 2, but is it going to be enough? Even with a helping hand, is close combat going to be enough to pick up the knockout onto it with that reflect support that's there? Sorry, there's no reflect support there, so potentially you could do, but I think, you know, the one thing that you could do if you're Groudon, maybe set up a Max Rockfall this turn, and just allow that kind of chip to take down the Yanshao and do some damage to the Indeedee in the same turn, and try and get a Trick Room up with Porygon 2.
Yeah, the Indeedee knowing that it could be in the way here, going for that Protect, and Minshao actually going straight away for that Taunt into the opposing Porygon 2. It's going to shut down any potential here for a Trick Room, as Groudon does indeed go for the Max Rockfall, going to target down into the Indeedee, do some damage, and I think critically, like you said there, Lee, just set up that residual so the Minshao goes down at the end of the turn. But very interesting for the Porygon 2 to be able to sit here and be taunted. You know, it has a lot of sort of status moves like the Trick Room, Eerie Impulse, and Recover as well, so it's really now only locked into being able to go for Ice Beam. I wouldn't be surprised to see it switch out at the next turn, just so that it has utility of all of its moves going forward.
Yeah, that probably would be the indication there, because once you can reset the taunt, then allow it to kind of come back onto the field, it's going to have access to that again. We saw how problematic that was for Daniel, but by doing that, you're potentially switching something in for the Porygon 2 that is going to get knocked out by the Calyrex here, and giving you that Grim Nair boost and making it even more difficult to deal with. So that's something you've got to consider as well. Do you keep the Porygon 2 in, or do you kind of protect your Groudon, switch the Porygon 2 out just to reset the taunt, and potentially let something in the back go down for the ability to set up the Trick Room the following turn?
I mean, possibly as well, if Calyrex and Indeedee together can't necessarily pick up a KO against Groudon and Porygon 2 straight away, you could possibly see a double up into that Calyrex trying to remove it from the field. But there's actually been a nice switch here, bringing in the Incineroar. The Intimidate's not going to matter, but I think having the Dark typing is going to be critical here. Obviously, you're going to take no damage from any Psychic type attacks. We've seen a lot of Expanding Force going around here on the field, particularly when there's a Porygon 2 in that slot. The Helping Hand comes out, Groudon decides to go for a Protect. Possibly not going to see any damage being dealt out here on the turn, as it is indeed Expanding Force from the Calyrex.
That is a phenomenal adjustment here from Yoav, because I think it's a very smart one, you know, knowing that this is the route that Daniel's been going down a lot of these battles, and bringing the Incineroar there, the switch, just getting it onto the field so it can start disrupting and really threatening the Calyrex on Daniel's side of the field with potential attacks like Snarl, which are reducing this special attack damage output, and it makes it easier for maybe Groudon and Porygon 2 to function going forward. You haven't got your Trick Room, but do you necessarily need it as long as the light screen's in effect? And you've got to remember as well that the Groudon has got that +2 special defense already, so it is going to be in a better situation, especially with a lot more health now. And we've seen how much Precipice Blades can do. It doesn't worry about the redirection here, so Daniel's still got a lot of work to do, and really being able to deal with the Incineroar really puts a little bit of kink in his kind of plan.
Yeah, Incineroar is definitely difficult to deal with. The Indeedee, however, just going to go straight away up for that helping hand once again, as Calyrex decides goes for Astral Barrage this time. There's no normal types here on the field. Wants to deal out some damage, but you can see the light screen and the boost really paying off. Does very little to that Groudon, and of course not going to be dealing any kind of super effective damage to that Incineroar at all. Groudon able to find its mark with that Precipice Blade and able to retaliate with a really big chunk of damage, as Incineroar adds insult to injury, going for that Snarl as well. Actually picks up the KO against the Calyrex and will reduce that special attack of the Indeedee, making a very, very steep hill for Indeedee to climb to try and close out a set here.
Yeah, no, with only expanding force, it's not going to be able to hit the Incineroar, unfortunately, so that the game is now locked for Yoav to take this set. Unfortunately for Daniel, just not being able to kind of overcome the Groudon, and like you mentioned earlier, in this match, losing the Cinderace so quickly at the start of this game was really too costly for him to be able to kind of come back from.
Well, Groudon just going to be able to go for that Precipice Blades once again and pick up the KO, meaning Yoav Reuven is going to be able to take this losers round 2 match. Huge congratulations to him.
Yeah,